GIF is often the best format for optimizing illustrations, type, and other graphics that have large areas of solid color. As with other formats, your goal when optimizing a GIF is to make it as small as possible, but keep it looking good. There are a number of techniques for accomplishing both goals at once, some less obvious than others, that I'm going to cover in this movie. I'm starting here with a PSD file, a Photoshop document file. You can see in the Layers panel that the Photoshop document file has layers, although when I optimize the file as a GIF, the layers will flatten into a single layer. To optimize as a GIF, or a GIF as some people pronounce it, I'll open the Save for Web and Devices window. Here I'm going to use the 2 Up tab this time. I could just as easily use the 4 Up tab to compare additional views, or the Optimize tab, where I see just a single view of how the image will look optimized as a GIF. I like the 2 Up tab because here I can compare the original PSD file that's on the left with a preview of the GIF as it will look with the settings that happen to be over here at the moment in the column on the right. And there's a summary of those settings underneath this GIF preview. Of all of the settings on the right, the one that has the largest impact on the size and appearance of a GIF is the number of colors from which the optimized GIF is constructed. At the moment, you can see that this GIF contains only 16 colors. I can increase that number, but the maximum number of colors that a GIF can have is 256. I'll go ahead and choose 256 here, and as I do, notice that the appearance of the GIF preview changes, so that it looks closer to the original PSD on the left. There are actually many more colors than 256 in the original PSD file, particularly in variations of color around the edges of some of these objects. That's caused by anti-aliasing. When I optimize the file as a GIF, all of the colors in the file are indexed down to the limited number of colors here in the color table. Reducing the number of colors in the color table, in other words, the number of colors that make up the GIF, is the best way to reduce the file size of the GIF. Right now, the file size of this GIF with 256 colors is 22.99 kilobytes, as reported here underneath the GIF preview. I'd like to try to get that number down. The approach I usually take is to go up to the Colors field and start reducing the numbers of colors in the file by choosing one of the preset numbers here. So I'll try 128 colors, and as I do that, keep your eye on the file. The appearance of the image doesn't change very much, but the file size has been reduced by a little bit over 1 kilobyte. I'll continue down the Colors menu, keeping my eye on the file size and the appearance of the image. At 64 colors, the image still looks good, and the file size is even lower. I'll try 32 colors. Now I'm starting to see some shifts in color when I compare the GIF preview to the original PSD. For example, the bicyclist's lips no longer are red in this GIF preview, because there is no red color left in the color table. If I go down to 16 colors, the image has really started to degrade. A number of colors have shifted. For example, her bodysuit is now brown as compared to black in the original image. And I see some jagged edges along various objects in the image. I also see some dots of color in her gloves, in her hair, and her leg, which are the result of dithering. Dithering is Photoshop's attempt to simulate a color that is not in the color table by combining dots of colors that are there. I really don't like the way that that looks in this image, so for all these reasons, I probably wouldn't take the number of colors down to 16 as I optimize this image. Just so you can see how this works, I'll reduce the number of colors even further to 8, which causes a lot more dithering, to 4, where things are even worse, and down to 2, where there are only 2 colors, black and white, so the image looks like a patterned line drawing. I think 64 colors was the lowest number of colors that looked acceptable to me, so I'll put the Colors field back to 64. Now the file size is 19.82 kilobytes. What else can I do to bring this number down? One thing I can try is reducing the amount of dither. So I'll go to the dither field here, which is currently set to 100%, and I'll move the slider down. And as you can see, that did reduce the file size slightly. The image still looks good, so I might go so far as to turn dither off altogether from this menu by choosing No Dither. By the way, these other 3 choices are just different patterns of dither. So with No Dither, I think the image still looks fine. The colors are relatively true to the colors in the original PSD, and the file size is a bit lower, 19.6 kilobytes. Another thing I can do to bring file size down in a GIF is to go to the lossy field and add a little bit of lossy compression, which discards image data, thereby making the file smaller. I'll click the arrow to the right of the lossy field, and that gives me this slider. If I drag it too far to the right, you can see that the image starts to degrade significantly. So I'm just going to drag it back this way. Maybe I'll leave it at about 20. And I'll click to close that slider. You can see that the file size is now even lower, 18.61 kilobytes, and the image still looks good to me. One more thing that I can try to reduce the file size of this GIF is to change the color reduction palette, which is right up here in this menu. The color reduction palette is a formula that determines which colors, in this case which 64 colors, will populate the color table. The selective color palette that is currently selected is very similar to the perceptual and adaptive color palettes. All three of these look at the original source image, the PSD, and select colors from that image, but each one of these three uses a different formula to do that. The best approach here is just to try each one and see which one creates a smaller file with the best appearance. So right now it's set to selective. If I try perceptual, I think the image still looks good, and I've reduced the file size slightly. Let's see what the adaptive palette looks like. That still looks good, and here the file size is the smallest, 18.48K. So I'm going to go with that one. Before I leave the color palette menu, I want to show you one more menu choice here, and that is the restrictive color palette. Watch what happens when I choose the restrictive color palette. Many of the colors in the image have shifted, so they're no longer true to the original colors. What the restrictive palette does is shift the colors from those in the original file to web-safe colors. In the color table, you can see that all of the colors in the file are now web-safe because they all have a small diamond in their center. The restrictive palette is clearly not the right choice here, and in many cases it's not the right choice. So I generally stick with the selective, adaptive, or perceptual palettes. I'm going to put my palette back to adaptive now. So now my image is 18.48 kilobytes. If I need it to be smaller, about all that's left to do is to reduce the width and height of the file if that's appropriate for my web page design. So for example, if I go to the image size area here, I can type in a width of say 250 pixels. The height changes proportionately. I'll go to the quality menu and I'll choose bicubic sharper, which is the best of these formulas for reducing image size, and then I'll click in a blank area. Of course, the physical dimensions of the file got smaller in the preview window, and if you take a look at the file size, it's been significantly reduced down to 10.23K. So now I'm satisfied with this optimized preview in terms of the two-pronged test for optimization, file size and image appearance. So I'm ready to save by clicking the Save button, and in the Save Optimized As dialog box, I'll choose where to save the image on my desktop. I'll leave the image name as it is, and you can see that it automatically gets the extension GIF, and I'll make sure that Format is set to Images Only, and I'll click Save. Now I'll go out to my desktop, and there's my GIF. I'm going to open it in Photoshop, and I want to compare it to the original, so I'll go up to the Arrange Documents menu and choose this 2-up view. Here's my GIF on the left. I think this image quality is acceptable for online viewing. The file is certainly much smaller, and it's in a format that can be viewed online. So those are the techniques I use for optimizing a graphic as a GIF. Start with an image that has large areas of flat color, reduce the number of colors, try reducing the amount of dithering, and add some lossy compression to get the GIF as small as possible but keep it looking good.